And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could roaming gangs of rabid backyard squirrels protect my family from stray feral cats? And will my infant nephew be removed from Santa's naughty list next year if he could stop being so much of a Captain Poopy Pants? And now, the podcast host who would never ruin Taint Week with his poopy pants, Pete Dominic!
Yes, that's right, Pete Co. Thank you very much for several mentions of poopy pants. Means I win a bet. How many times I thought you'd mention that in today's intro. And more importantly, thank you for mentioning Taint Week. That's right, folks. The week between Christmas and New Year's. I always work it. I'm here for you. I'll be here each and every day this week. I can't promise you I'll have two guests. I might take some time this week because I'm pretty burnt out. But I'm still here because Taint Week deserves the attention. You really got to. So many people ignore the taint, but I don't. This week between Christmas and New Year's, so many people think, oh, nothing happens. You're not supposed to do anything. Nobody's going to get back to your calls, emails, even if you do go to your work. No. I'm here for you, paying attention to the taint. Because I care. I see the parts of you that are untouched, that need love. And I bring them the love and attention they deserve each and every day. Not just Taint Week. I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, but I do think that this week deserves more attention. And so I am happy to be here with you all week hosting Stand Up, where I have great guests, as always. Jonathan Alter is my guest today, for example. And I just left it with him because we had an almost hour-long conversation last week. He is one of the most respected journalists of our time. He is a best-selling author who wrote books about FDR, Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, and more. And he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's one of those legends that you sit down because he's been in the middle of so many important things and stories that he's covered and people they know. It's one of those, I realize I've got a lot of those kind of older statesmen in my life that have been around the block, and to be able to be in conversation with them is a real honor and pleasure. Jonathan Alter joins me as a very special guest here on a Monday during Taint Week. I hope you had a great Christmas, if that's something you celebrate, a Kwanzaa, if that's something you celebrate, as well as maybe a Christmas Eve. What did you do? Did you have a good time? I hope you didn't get COVID, although I agree with my friend Dean Obedala, who tweeted, I anecdotally don't think I've ever known more people in my life that have Omicron. I may even have it given my activities over the past few days. We went into New York City on Christmas Eve. We stayed outside almost the whole day. Well, at least I did. Val and the girls went into a couple of stores, department stores on Fifth Avenue. I did not go in there. I did not want to go in. I wouldn't have gone in even if there was no pandemic because I don't like being around that kind of crazy amounts of wealth that much, at least not in a retail store. Like, I'll go to a rich person's house or island, but I don't want to go into Bergdorf Goodman or any of those. But the Val and the girls had a good time, and hopefully they didn't get Omicron. We also ate at a restaurant on Friday night in Manhattan. It wasn't very crowded. And then, so who knows? Maybe I got it there. Maybe my parents brought it down. They came down the next day, which is why I was so worried. But it was the risk that we took. And it's been almost 2 years, and we all feel safe with our booster enough to know that we wanted to get together with my parents, even though we had spent some time in public, and so had they, and so had the girls. That's where we're at. And some of you are able to stick to a much more strict standard of staying away from folks. And I mean, listen, at this point, I'm having a hard time judging folks who are vaccinated with their booster, especially. But I feel real bad for my friends who have young kids who can't get vaccinated yet, or other folks who have, issues, other types of issues. And mostly, probably, I feel bad for the frontline healthcare workers and essential workers who've done everything right, but can't do anything about it. They've got to be around these folks who are unvaccinated all the time with this. And so, you're torn because you don't want to be a host and spreading it. You want to do all you can. I feel like I've done a pretty good job given the nature of my work, mostly being in a shed. I'm fortunate that way. But, I got teenage girls. I'm always constantly, kids think they're indestructible. My kids have a lot of friends. What am I supposed to do? You're never allowed to see your friends. So that's, been a constant challenge. Val works one-on-one with a lot of people, so it's not easy for anybody, I think, especially when you're a unit amongst other people, probably. So that is the end of my Christmas recap, basically, in terms of Omicron and how bad it's gotten and how are you doing. I'm just trying to put it out there to hopefully relate with you. Also, just want to mention that I watched that great film on Netflix, Don't Look Up, Adam McKay's new film, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Meryl Streep and Jennifer Lawrence. Mark Rylance steals the show and every episode that he's in. An allegory for climate change, basically, it's just so great. I don't talk about this stuff. I'm not good at talking about it, certainly not alone. So I'm not going to go into it. I'll just say I really enjoyed it. We watched it as a family. Julia got a projector for Christmas, so you throw it up on the screen, which, by the way, how is that better than just a big screen HD TV? It's not, apparently, right? Like a projector screen, I guess it's a good thing to do outside, or if you want even a bigger picture, or you don't want to put a screen on your wall or something, but it's never a better picture, right? Are we debating that? We're not debating that, but I don't think. But anyway, I love that movie. I watched it twice. 2 times. That's right. Yeah, I watched it late Christmas night because my brother texted me and said, you have to watch this. And then I watched it again with everybody on Christmas night. So Christmas Eve and Christmas night. Anyway, had a great time with my parents and Val and the girls. It was just us. And everybody got nice presents. I got a nice Lululemon shirt, which I haven't taken off. And I also got the Apple, what are the things that you can track so you don't lose things? I forget what they're called. Little Apple chips from Apple that you connect to your iPhone so you don't lose your wallet or your keys or stuff. So that's kind of like an insulting joke, but certainly thoughtful. Because I'm not too bad. I don't think I'm too bad, but I misplaced my wallet. I barely even carry a wallet. Why did they get them for me? I'm going to put one in my dog's ass. Anyway, I got that. And then most importantly, the thing I love the most, a pair of binoculars, which I asked Santa for and got. And I love it. Haven't put those down either. So I did well. I hope you got some presents and more importantly, gave some presents that you liked and that your friends or family liked. I hope that you had a good weekend, and I will be here all week covering the news and interviewing super smart people. That's what we do here on Stand Up. So let's get to that news from the Christmas weekend. It's time for the last 24. Well, there were several political stories, I think, to mention, but nothing really blew up too much, I think, over the weekend, unless I missed it and wasn't paying attention. I think the main story, the top story, of course, continues to be Omicron and the fact that it is spreading so fast throughout the country and across the world, and that meant for a lot of people that it was spiking, that they shut down their plans. For example, headlines like 4,000 flights got canceled, and I think basically because flight crews were ill, were sick. Broadway shows being canceled. So even if you didn't cancel your plans and somehow made it on a plane or to grandma's house or whatever, a lot of plans were simply canceled without your choice, your flight, your show, or anything else that you were planning on doing. And as you might have heard last week, the former disgraced President Donald Trump first took credit for all the vaccines. He said, I came up with all 3 of these vaccines. But, of course, he said this to Candace Owens, who's an anti-vaxxer, and it was really a full-throated endorsement of the vaccine, even though he said, I think you should have a choice. So he certainly doesn't agree with mandates, at least on the record. You know he would be enforcing these mandates for everybody but poor people and black people if he was reelected, but because of fascism, but whatever. And then he would take credit for the success of them. Regardless, you heard what he said last week, supporting the vaccines and the boosters. Well, Anthony Fauci was asked about that on Sunday, and here's what he had to say to Jonathan Karl on ABC's This Week.
You know, it was interesting on this question of vaccination. I'm sure you saw former President Trump came out and said that he had received the booster shot. He actually got booed a little bit by the crowd of his supporters as he said that. And now, there's another interview he just did with a conservative outlet with Candace Owens, where he really pushed back on the idea that the vaccine is not protecting people. He said that the people going to hospitals are the ones largely that haven't been vaccinated. You don't die if you get the vaccine. Those were Donald Trump's words. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if his supporters listen to that.
Well, I certainly hope so, John. We'll take anything we can get about getting people vaccinated. I was a bit dismayed when former President Trump came out and made that statement and his followers booed him, which I was stunned by that. I mean, given the fact of how popular he is with that group, that they would boo him, which tells me how recalcitrant they are about being told what they should do. And I think that his continuing to say that people should get vaccinated and articulating that to them, in my mind, is a good thing. I hope he keeps it up.
It'll be interesting to see how many anti-vax Trump supporters would possibly change their mind based on what Donald Trump thinks about this vaccine after it's been so widely discredited by conspiracy theorists and cranks all across the nation. I'm not sure how we would get that data. You know what? After I saw Trump, pushing back on Candace Owens and supporting the vaccine, I thought, you know what? I think I will get it after all. All right, here is now some more on COVID. Dr. Ajish Shah was on Meet the Press, and he said that domestic travel is the question. He said it's pretty reasonable for fully vaccinated and boosted individuals. It's not March 2020. We're in a very different place. Kind of what I was saying earlier, except not as well as Dr. Ajish Shah.
There's a lot of confusion out there. Number one, there's yet more studies that seem to indicate Omicron is less severe. How should the public take in that information?
Yeah. So, Chuck, there is, I would say, a moderate amount of data that it may be less severe. That's good. We want it to be as sort of mild as possible. There is also some data out of the UK and Denmark that maybe it's not that much less severe. The big picture point here in my mind is if you are fully vaccinated and boosted, you're going to have a mild course with this virus. If you are fully vaccinated but not boosted and you're in a high-risk group, I would still assume that you could end up having a pretty bad breakthrough. And if you're unvaccinated, you really are on your own here. Like, you're really taking risks. It's not going to be mild enough to get you through this without potentially getting you into trouble.
All right. How much comfort should a vaccinated, boosted person have traveling in the next month?
Pretty good. Like, I think domestic travel is pretty reasonable. Wear a high quality mask because you don't want to have a breakthrough. Even if it's mild, it'll ruin your travel plans. So I would wear a high quality mask. I think that's important. Obviously, if you're visiting high risk people, take extra precautions, use testing if you can get the test. But I don't think a vaccinated, boosted person needs to be holed up at home right now. This is not March of 2020. We are in a very different place.
But let's head over to another expert who I don't play nearly enough from, but my brilliant cousin Darcy, who listens to the show almost every day, texted me over the weekend. We were texting, and she said that I play too much Gottlieb. She didn't quite say it like that. She's like the nicest person in the world, but she's like basically less Scott Gottlieb and more Michael Osterholm. And then she suggested another epidemiologist that I want to look into and perhaps have on the show as well. Michael Osterholm of University of Minnesota, pretty reliable source, very respected epidemiologist because he's pretty much been right all along with his predictions. He was on CNN yesterday with the brilliant Julia Chatterley, who did an excellent interview with him. I watched the whole 8 minutes and highly recommend you do too, but I'm just going to play a couple clips from that for you right now.
As you've witnessed in other countries around the world, once Omicron starts to take off, at least for 3 to 8 weeks, you could expect to see major increases in case numbers. And we're seeing that here in the United States right now. It's been remarkable just in the last 5 to 7 days how many metropolitan areas are now reporting widespread Omicron outbreaks. So I think this is unfolding much as we've seen throughout Europe and South Africa, and now we're seeing in a number of other African countries. So basically we have to be prepared for what's coming these next few weeks.
We were just talking anecdotally on the show about studies that have been done in Scotland, in the UK, also in South Africa, to your point, that have been hit before the United States, suggesting that the severity of the disease seems to be lower when compared to Delta. Do you expect, anecdotally again, to see the same things in the United States?
Well, I think that it is the case, in fact, that there is a real likelihood that we're going to see over the course of the next several months around the world the situation where the cases overall are milder. However, what I think is often missed in that conversation is the fact that there are going to be so many more of the cases that even if a smaller percentage of them actually have severe illness, the absolute numbers of people who are severely ill and needing hospitalization could actually be higher. Here in the United States, we still have a large number of people unvaccinated who are surely at high risk for serious illness. And we're seeing many breakthroughs right now in individuals who have even had their 3 doses of vaccine, which is not good news on one hand. On the other hand, I think they are less severe because of that, and the vaccines are protecting them from being severely ill, hospitalizations, and deaths. So I think that we are going to see this milder spectrum, but I'm not sure that that by itself is going to really make the big difference in terms of what's happening to our healthcare systems.
He made so many good points in this 8-minute interview. I got to play just like 2 more minutes of Michael Osterholm and Julia Chatterley on CNN over the weekend.
I have to say, in my 46 years in the business, I've not seen what I see happening right now in the United States in terms of just the number of families that are being impacted by Omicron. Just in the last day, I've learned of 5 different friends, colleagues, families where a student came home from college thinking they were not infected because they had taken a test several days before, and now they transmitted the virus to people in those families. That's remarkable to see how fast that's happening.
All right, one more clip for you from Michael Osterholm, because it's just such good, solid analysis and information, and I always want to try to bring that here.
Those people who are immune compromised, those people who have underlying comorbidities, as we call them, for having serious illness, including having high body mass indexes, we don't want to have those people get infected and find out that, yes, indeed, Omicron still can kill those people. And so I think that that's the important message, is we can help each other right now. And one of the points that keeps getting made is getting vaccinated. Yes, get vaccinated. But remember, it takes, even after 3 doses of vaccine, 10 to 14 days after that 3rd dose, before we're really seeing the vaccine protection kick in. So, if you're just getting your first dose today, don't think you can get it this morning and go to some social event tonight and be protected. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, immunity takes time to build. You said something recently, and I wanted to ask you about it. You said Mother Nature may have helped in a twisted way by delivering a strain that's less severe but highly transmissible, so it can outcompete the severe Delta. Your point here was it sort of gives a greater degree after this of natural immunity without having perhaps the same degree of severe illness that we've seen in the past. Can you put it into English for viewers, please, perhaps what it means after this?
Yeah. We don't really know. One of the big challenges is the fact that what is going to be the next new variant? Last April and May, I said numerous times that I thought the darkest days of the pandemic could still be ahead of us. And I think a lot of people at that time were not comfortable with those statements. They thought that I was being extreme and scary. Well, now we see what we have happening with both Delta and with Omicron. What I continue to be very concerned about is what's after Omicron. And that's why we need to continue to do research on vaccines that we call pan-coronavirus vaccines, meaning they cover multiple different strains. And so, we can't just assume we're going to be out of the woods after the, this Omicron surge passes. We're still going to be living with COVID.
Michael, Bill Gates said a similar thing, that perhaps we haven't seen the worst of the pandemic yet, but he still reiterated, as he said in the past, that he believes the pandemic ends in 2022. Do you disagree based on what you just said there?
I don't disagree. I just hope that's true, but I also realize hope is not a strategy. And so, in that sense, we still have to be prepared for the fact that we could see new variants emerge, ones that may not be more transmissible, but now may have new mechanisms for evading the immune protection. So all the protection that we've accumulated over the course of the last 2 years may not be nearly as helpful if a new variant emerges. So I think that's what we have to be constantly looking at. So on one hand, we've got to deal with the right now, the next 2 to 8 weeks here in the United States, but we've got to also keep an eye in the future and say, what are we going to do if another new variant emerges? Let's not get caught flat-footed.
All right, Michael Osterholm on CNN with great questions from reporter Julia Chatterley. And I thought that was interesting, and so I wanted to give it all as much as I could to you. And we also see that they've developed a lot of different treatments and therapies for, and there's also even another vaccine, and there will be more vaccines, and they call this pan vaccine, a vaccine for that's better than all of them, treating all of the variants. And so I feel like with the treatments and therapies and potential new vaccines, perhaps it's true we will be out of this sometime in 2022. But he just said 2 to 8 weeks, and that puts us at the end of February in the longer term scenario. So brace yourself for the winter. And I guess that would also have me around the time I'm starting my seeds, some of my early plants for my garden. So I'm always trying to look forward to something. All right, that is your
COVID news.
Now let's go to ABC News' David Muir, who was interviewing the president over the Christmas weekend. David Muir asking the president about what can be done on voting rights. I don't like the way he framed this question or the next one. I don't like when he says nothing has been done. The House of Representatives, as a result of tons of activism, years of work of politics, passed amazing laws to restore voting rights. It's the Senate and down to one senator. So when he says nothing has been done, it really irks the shit out of me. And I wish it bothered President Biden. He would have had a similar response. But, you know, I guess he's not listening to me. Nonetheless, this is a big news story. His answer to this question is pretty big. Let's take a listen.
You know, many of your supporters believe in order to protect democracy in this country, you've got to protect voters' rights.
Yes.
As we near the end of year one, nothing's been done. It's been blocked by the filibuster. Are you prepared to support fundamental changes in the Senate rules to get this done?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means whatever it takes. Change the Senate rules to accommodate major piece of legislation without requiring 60 votes.
So you support a carve-out of the filibuster for voting rights?
The only thing standing between getting voting rights legislation passed and not getting passed is the filibuster. I support making an exception on voting rights for the filibuster.
Well, the president hadn't quite said it like that, and that made a lot of news, so we'll see what happens in the days and weeks to come. Now back to David Muir, who also asked President Biden about the empty shelves that, again, I haven't seen them. There's articles about this. Is this really a big deal? I feel like it's been fact-checked, and there are some issues, but this empty shelf thing, I'm just not quite sure about. It's my understanding that there are, of course, supply chain issues and harder times finding a lot of things, and obviously things are costing more. But my understanding is the retail industry is saying that they might have their best year ever. I mean, people are finding things to buy. It's a matter of when they get them and if they can get them exactly when they want. But the retail numbers are through the roof, so I just don't get that. However, I think he's right on the testing thing. It seems that the Biden administration and government has really messed up the testing situation.
2 years into this pandemic, you're a year into the presidency. Empty shelves and no test kits in some places 3 days before Christmas when it's so important. Is that good enough?
No, nothing's been good enough. But look where we are. When last Christmas, we were in a situation where we had significantly fewer people vaccinated. Emergency rooms were filled. You had serious backups in hospitals that were causing great difficulties. We're in a situation now where we have 200 million people fully vaccinated. 200 million people fully vaccinated. And we have more than that who have had at least one shot. And they're getting these booster shots as well.
All right, let's take a break from the news for a lesson on culture and I guess history, although it's not too ancient history. This is a lesson on Kwanzaa from Black News Channel and Dr. Greg Carr. I saw our friend Ty over the weekend was learning about this, and so I thought I'd take a look. Here it is. A good, quick, 2-minute lesson on Kwanzaa.
As I mentioned earlier in the intro, Kwanzaa starts Sunday. So tell us about some of those things. How do we celebrate? Where do we start?
Oh, okay. Well, you could almost start literally on the mat, the symbols of Kwanzaa. So if you want to observe Kwanzaa, you would get a mat, a simple straw mat, and you could get a candle holder, what they call a kinara in Kwanzaa. And you have 7 candles for each day. The first candle is the black candle. There it is right there. The sister's lighting it. That candle celebrates umoja, or unity. The idea that black people have a unity of self, of community. And you light that candle, and then you gather with your family and you discuss that principle of the day, the principle of unity. The next day, Kujichagulia, is self-determination. Then you light the green candle. You put 3 candles on the right and 3 on the left, the green on the right, the red on the left. That is self-determination. You discuss that principle. Ujima, next, collective work and responsibility. Our community must pull together. Then you go to the red candle to your left. You light that one. The next one, Ujamaa, that is cooperative economics. We pull together. Look at BNC. You're pooling together our economics for black news. Nia, purpose. That is the next candle. That is the next night. You light that right candle to the right. And then Kuumba, creativity, and Imani, faith. The last night you usually have a feast. You have a nice feast. And there
what
are other symbols.
Foods? What are the foods for the feast?
Now, you know the food, sis. The foods are whatever black people bring. You got Big Mama's corn. You got sweet. Well, yes, you don't have a potato salad with raisins. But then again, you can bring what
Dr.
you want.
Carr, don't do it. No.
I'm just kidding. But no. The whole purpose is family. So, and that's very important, actually. You can give gifts. Zawadi is the word for gifts, but the gifts are usually books, or you try to purchase them from black businesses. You can have the Kikambi Chach Umoja, which is the unity cup. You pour libation for your ancestors. We have national ancestors. We lost Cicely Tyson this year. She's an ancestor. Bell Hooks. We call our family ancestors, and you basically come together for ritual celebrations.
Yeah, thank you to Ty, who told me about that. He was watching that, I think. Is that what you were watching, Ty? He said thought you said you were watching Dr. Carr. I don't know if he said where, but that was from Black News Channel, and I just reached out to Dr. Carr as a result of seeing that and asked him if he would join me in a conversation, which would be pretty cool because he's a Howard professor, highly respected academic. Anyway, speaking of very celebrated and highly respected black folks, Desmond Tutu passed away over the weekend, a major loss for one of the most highly respected leaders of his time. Of course, the Archbishop from Cape Town, South Africa, who used his pulpit and spirited oratory, the New York Times writes, to help bring down apartheid in South Africa, then became the leading advocate of peaceful reconciliation under black majority rule. He died Sunday in Cape Town. He was 90 years old. His death was confirmed by South Africa's president, who called the Archbishop a leader of principle and pragmatism who gave meaning to the biblical insight that faith without works is dead. Barack and Michelle Obama, Queen Elizabeth, and so many more paying tribute to Desmond Tutu. In a statement, former President Obama wrote, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a mentor, a friend, and a moral compass for me and so many others, a universal spirit. Archbishop Tutu was grounded in the struggle for liberation and justice in his own country, but also concerned with injustice everywhere. Queen Elizabeth writing, I am joined by the whole royal family in being deeply saddened by the news of the death of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a man who tirelessly championed human rights in South Africa and across the world. President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden also issued a joint statement, writing, on this morning after Christmas, we are heartbroken to learn of the passing of a true servant of God and of the people, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, and so many more tributes being paid from around the world. No sign on disgraced former President Donald Trump. I mean, maybe I didn't look. Maybe he wrote something. I'm sure comedian J.L. Covan will come out with the exact right words that Trump would say if he could. And here is Desmond Tutu, a little audio from the founding meeting of the elders in South Africa in July of 2007. Desmond Tutu in his own words.
We just want to say thank you, God. Thank you that you have brought us to this point when we can speak about the essential goodness of all human beings. We've been through rough times in this country, and God has helped us to see that the bad, the evil, doesn't have the last word. It's ultimately that goodness and laughter and joy and caring and compassion, those are what are going to prevail in the end. And this is what we...
All right, Desmond Tutu. And now let's take a major step down and head over to Meet the Press, where there was a bit of a debate. I wanted to share this with you between a black historian named Jelani Cobb and a Republican black congressman on the issue of CRT being taught in schools, critical race theory in schools. And in my opinion, with all due respect, only one perspective here matters. It's the perspective of the historian in the conversation, and less so the black Republican Byron Donalds of Florida on critical race theory yesterday on Meet the Press.
Congressman Donalds, I think this is the concern. You've heard this concern, which is, I brought up the Tulsa race massacre because I wasn't taught it in schools. I went to public schools in Florida. Something I learned in the last 2 years was Axe Handle Sunday, which was a horrible racial violence in Jacksonville, Florida. I assume you think we should be teaching these events in our public schools.
Absolutely.
So how would you do it, and what does banning critical race theory, in your mind, do to impact the teaching of, say, Axe Handle Sunday?
Look, the number one thing we all agree on is that history should be taught. Objective history should be taught at all times. I went to an elementary school, right? Even if it's painful. I went to an elementary school where they taught objective history about our nation from slavery through Jim Crow, through civil rights era. So I learned that in elementary school. Every child should have that. The issue with critical race theory is it is a subjective view of American history and American law, using race as the lens to focus. And when you bring subjectivity into the classroom, that is what has parents upset. That is what leads, unfortunately, to children being divided in certain class segments based upon race. That has happened in some schools across our country, not all. But when you have something like that occur, that is when parents step up and they oppose it. And we shouldn't have subjectivity. We should definitely teach objective history in our country.
Well, let me ask you this. Go ahead, Jelani.
Yeah, I happen to be a historian, and historians don't really believe there is such a thing as objective history. What we do is recognize that we have a perspective, that we're all subjective. And what we try to do is, despite those subjectivities, follow what the evidence suggests most stringently. And so that's how we come to the conclusion there is this dynamic of race in which one group of people have disproportionately been victimized, and one group of people have disproportionately benefited from that victimization. It's difficult to get around that, even if people think that it will make people feel uncomfortable. And the last thing I'll say is that there is no teaching of critical race theory in our schools. I wrote about this in The New Yorker. The critical race theory is an advanced issue of jurisprudence, legal jurisprudence, for which there's an extensive body of scholarship. If your fifth grader is learning critical race theory, then I would say congratulations, because you have a genius on your hand and they're in their last year of law school.
Congressman, I want you to respond to that. The idea that did we search for a solution to a problem that didn't exist when it came to critical race theory?
Oh, no, that is not true at all. That's not true at all. Look, the number one thing that's happened with critical CRT ending up in classrooms is not an actual course. It is through diversity, equity, inclusion seminars that teachers take. It's through what comes in classroom material, in textbook material, in library material. And all these things actually bring us the subjective view, not of our history, but how children that subjectivity is being brought to children today, how they view each other, how they view themselves. Mm-hmm. That's what we have to be very, very careful about. That's what parents are very, very careful of.
All right, Jelani Cobb really hammering home the only opinion, in my opinion, that matters there. But feel free to think for yourself. As always, folks, wish Chuck Todd would do more of that on his show, because probably the clip that I saw most folks talking about, that's just in my feeds, is the 1619 Project Professor Nicole Hannah-Jones pushing back on Chuck Todd's questions about parents and their concerns about CRT being taught in schools. I don't think I need to set it up much more than that. We can really let Nicole Hannah-Jones do the rest.
To think.
At what age?
And I wouldn't want my child.
Is there an age restriction in your mind?
To a school.
There's this
about teaching what?
Teaching sort of when it comes to teaching our past. There's this, and I think it's just coming basically through a racial lens. But there's this, parents are saying, "Hey, don't make my kid feel guilty," and I know a parent of color is going, "What are you talking about? I've got to teach reality." When do you do it, and how do you do it?
Well, I think you should just think a little bit about your framing. You said parents, and then you said parents of color. So the
white parents and parents of color.
White
fair
parents
point. Yeah.
are not representing. As a matter of fact, white parents are representing fewer than half of all public school parents, and yet they have an outsized voice in this debate. I have a child who, just by watching the news when she was 8 years old, she saw Laquan McDonald, a teenager in Chicago, get shot 16 times by police on CBS in the morning show. And she asked me, why did they kill that boy? So I can't wait to have these conversations with my child. And I don't think that we should be asking what is the appropriate age. I think we should be asking, what are the appropriate conversations at that age? But our children are being raised in a racialized society. They are noticing things. They have questions. And I don't think teaching an accurate rendering of history It's about making white children feel guilty. I don't know an educator. I've been covering education for 2 decades. I've never seen a teacher of any race tell a white child, you are responsible for what happened in the past. I just don't think that that's happening. And even all of the people who have claimed that that has happened have not been able to produce a shred of evidence that that's true. I think some students who are white probably walk away from some of these lessons feeling very uncomfortable, as we should. We should be uncomfortable with the hard parts of our past. And a master educator knows how to give those lessons without making students internalize this feelings of racism.
Wow, there was a lot there, and I would love to discuss that further with folks. I thought a lot about that yesterday. I had a bit of a debate with my friend, a friend of mine, I won't say his name because it's a public person, about that, who was kind of criticizing me for hammering Chuck Todd for that. But my bottom line is that there are a whole bunch of people, even on the payroll at MSNBC, including people like Chris Hayes and Mehdi Hassan, off the top of my head, that would do a much better job at such conversations, most conversations, all conversations, than would Chuck Todd. And he's been sitting there for far too long. But just my issue with him, he says, yeah, white parents. No, it is no doubt that it's mostly white folks entirely that are concerned and complaining about what is being taught in our schools when it relates to our racial history, CRT, DEI, and so on. Yes, that's mostly white people, but I certainly was offended and irked, whatever you want to say, by the idea that it's white people versus. It's not all white people. It's mostly white people, as a matter of fact, that are also fighting against this in my town. And it's not like I want credit for it. I just want him not to overplay and frame wrong the truth about what is happening. And that entire episode was dedicated to race and our schools. And I just thought that was so poorly done. And he got raked for framing that the way that he did, as he should, in that case by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is brilliant in that moment. And most of the time, as far as I've ever seen. All right, well, that's all the clips I've got for you on today's show. And like I said, I've only got Jonathan Alter, and not only, I mean, the guy's a legendary journalist and author. Very excited to share my great conversation with him. But before that, I've got some headlines for you in what we call the news dump. Let's hit it, Pete Coe. What have you got?
Anthrax spewing fog machine, crazies in a huff. But of course, that's not a thing for today's news dump.
Well done, Pete Coe. That, of course, is a reference to the several now right-wing personalities who are claiming they were hit with bioweapons at a Texas event, which welcomed Eric Trump, ensnaring organizers in a bonkers new conspiracy theory, according to the Daily Beast. Again, a far-right group fantasizing that they'd been attacked with anthrax. Okay, well, let's get to some other headlines that are less crazy and actually happening. Okay, first of all, pretty much everybody has COVID, and if you don't yet, I think you're about to get it. I think that might be one headline that I just made up off the top of my head. But luckily, the FDA has approved a second COVID-19 pill for emergency use. That was last week. New York City announced it's going to have a scaled down Times Square New Year's celebration, according to Mayor Bill de Blasio. Crowds will total apparently only about 15,000. Viewing areas for the event that normally can accommodate about 58,000 will be limited to the crowds totaling 15,000. Everyone attending will have to wear a mask and show proof of vaccination. And the city, New York City, has been getting just absolutely crushed. I think they had like 50,000 new cases on Sunday. Economy showing signs of damage from the Omicron spike, according to the Wall Street Journal. Ted Kaczynski was moved from a Supermax prison to a medical facility, 79 years old. And he was moved from the Colorado Supermax there to a federal medical center in North Carolina. I'm sure he's going to escape. He's the Unabomber, 79 years old. The new James Webb Space Telescope blasted off successfully Saturday morning from a launch pad in French Guiana, a joint project between NASA, the European Space Center, and the Canadian Space Agency. The telescope will peer deeper into the cosmos and farther back in time to open a window on the universe as it took shape soon after the Big Bang, is from the press release. Though only roughly the size of a tennis court, the telescope is designed to detect light that was emitted 13.6 billion years ago at the dawn of the universe, maybe as little as 100 million years after the Big Bang. Maybe as little as 100 million years. What? And the world marked the 30th anniversary of the Soviet Union's collapse on Christmas night, 1991. Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev resigned and relinquished his powers, including the nuclear codes, to Russian President Boris Yeltsin. The flag that flew over the USSR that flew over the Kremlin was lowered, never to be raised again. Dam breaks are threatening worse flooding in Brazil. And authorities on Spain's Canary Islands have declared a volcanic eruption that started in September officially finished Saturday, following 10 days of no lava flows, seismic activity, or significant sulfur dioxide emissions. Spanish eruption's end brings emotional relief and rebuilding to the Canary Islands. Didn't even know about that. And finally, let me just share you one nice story. A Kentucky man raised thousands to deliver toys to storm victims for Christmas. His name is Sean Triplett, and he is a former Marine, grew up near the ground zero of those tornadoes that hit Mayfield, Kentucky a few weeks ago. And he's a retired Marine. Like I said, he rushed to town to see how he could help. And he said he'd been deployed 3 times and he's seen the worst. But this was the absolute worst war zone destruction everywhere. And he said that while he was visiting a shelter, he overheard a little boy tell his mother that I lost my Christmas. So after that, he put out a call on social media. His goal is to help 20 to 30 kids who were at storm shelters for the holidays. And he raised nearly $95,000 from donations all over the world to buy holiday presents for Kentucky storm victims in just over a week. Then, partnering with a local Walmart, he and his team of volunteers wrapped each gift and apparently close to like 4,000 toys in 3 days. Put on his red hat and coat and went to work. And his team of volunteers delivered more than 20,000 toys and counting. Good work, human beings, and a great place to end today's news dump. And speaking of good things, go to givewell.org/standup. Talking to my mom last night, she said she just signed up to make her donation. If you haven't already, GiveWell does amazing work. Best charity out there because they spend all of your dollar on actually relieving suffering and even death for those who are suffering the worst, children especially across the world. I'm not doing the full ad. I will later this week, but I do just want to mention givewell.org and all of the rest of the sponsors of the show. Please go to the link on the show notes and click on the sponsors, all of them, Shopify and Indeed and Quip, Tommy John. Go to and just click on the link. Even if you don't buy anything, show a little traffic and show a little support for the show while you're doing it. And the ultimate show of support is with a paid subscription. So if you haven't signed up yet, a bunch of people signed up over the Christmas week, which was amazing. Welcome aboard, everybody. I hope to see you at this week's Hangout. Well, there's going to be plenty to talk about there. But now it's time to just go to standupwithpete.com, by the way, if you didn't know the link to sign up right now. But now it's time to talk to my first and only guest of the Monday show. He is a guy I've known for quite a while in my career. I first interviewed him after, I think, his first book on President Obama. He is you've seen him on TV for years. He's an author, he's a TV analyst, a filmmaker. He publishes now a newsletter called Old Goats, Ruminating with Friends, which I love. His most recent book is a real hit, a widely respected look at a biography of Jimmy Carter called His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life. And, of course, he's the author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, The Center Holds, Obama and His Enemies, The Promise, President Obama, Year 1. And the book about FDR is so good, The Defining Moment, FDR's 100 Days and the Triumph of Hope. Very excited to have him joining me here on Stand Up for the first time in a while. He's been on once before, but we have been talking for years. He and his family have become good friends because I worked with his wife, Emily, at the Colbert Report for years. I don't know if you know I did, but I did work there. I can't say that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my conversation, this is like slightly dated in that I did it last week, and he did have a case of the Omicron while we were talking. He was ill with COVID, but he was fine to do it. So I think what he says is obviously his own personal experience with it. But other than that, I think everything is super evergreen and relevant. And I think you're going to love my conversation with Jonathan Alter. And if you do, and even if you don't, go on Twitter right now and say hello and thank him for joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Jonathan Alter, jonathanalter.com right now.
Hello.
Is this the Old Goats corporate headquarters?
Yes, indeed. You've reached the goat pen.
I'm calling for the top goat.
Yeah, the top goat. Yep, the top. And you are a goat too. You're a GOAT, right?
No one's ever called me a goat for any reason.
Well, I mean, you might be the GOAT of liberal talk show hosts.
I don't think like I said, I don't think anybody thinks that.
Well, you don't have a lot of competition, to be honest about it, since liberals haven't done that well in talk radio. But...
Well, hold on a second. I'm already recording and you're already being interesting. I said to you, I'm really excited about your new Substack, Old Goats. You've interviewed a couple of already well-known, Swoozie Kurtz, well-known actress, Susie Essman, well-known actress and comedian. And so I was just looking at the people that you've talked to for your new Substack. I said, I'd love to hear or read in this case is a conversation between Jonathan Alter and Alan Alda, and I have his contacts and I will send them along.
That would be great. I mean, it's a very eclectic group. So I've done, Ralph Nader and Andy Young and Gary Trudeau and Gary Hart and, a lot of different, Gary Wills, the great historian and political analyst.
Yeah, you got Robert Klein and Al Franken. You and Al Franken, you're friends with some of these people. You got Henry Winkler, the great Winkler, Mary Frances Berry, a lot of good. Wow, I didn't see all these people. I actually just saw the top of your Substack. This is great. I love Old Goats. I'm subscribing.
Good. Well, I hope that your listeners do too. It's, it's just a chance to kind of ruminate, to use a goat term, with people of experience who've got a little mileage on the odometer, and they still have a lot to say. These are people, mostly over 60, 65. I don't have an actual age cutoff. And some of them go way back. So I interviewed Newton Minow, who was JFK's head of the Federal Communications Commission and the father of televised presidential debates. And I realized that he's the last surviving member of the Kennedy administration. So some of these people I'm just trying to get while there's still time.
That's great. I want to read that one. And you know what so with Old Goats, it's a Substack, but it's some of them at least are transcripts of a conversation. What do you basically, you say you have a great point about the difference between, this kind of project and podcasts is, you give your guests and you get to take time to think and reflect about your answers, which I think is a great point, which is why I want you to do Old Goats on the Polo app. Do you know what that app is?
No, I don't actually.
So it's like you would make a video, or I would make a video of me asking you a question or saying something. You would then get the video of me, and then you would think about it for a while, and you would have that same amount of time, and then you would answer, although you don't have as much time, with your answer because you're sitting there stammering. I guess it's got to be in its current format, but I would watch your polos. I would watch your conversations with anybody.
Well, they're not podcasts. They're not on Zoom. They are transcripts that I have heavily edited, and it saves time. So if you're reading my interview with Henry Winkler and you want to get to Jump the Shark, you just go, and search for shark, and you're down to the part of the interview where he talks about it. And instead of listening to, an hour-long podcast, with all due respect to podcasters, and my son is one of them, you can kind of get to what you want in these interviews pretty fast. And so I do either an interview or a column on something in the news once a week. It's not heavy lifting. It's just trying to give people a sense of, I guess, wisdom, from people.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really great way to communicate, to let people think for a while. I mean, that's one of the reasons I would imagine you could probably talk for hours about this. I cannot, about writing, what makes a good writer, not necessarily always a great performer, by the way, right? And also, that you're currently on a podcast, like, I'm recording this conversation and I'm going to share it.
I understand that.
I wasn't sure if I was clear. If you just thought an old friend was calling to say, "Hey, heard you got COVID," because that is how it started. I did reach out to you a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago, and I said, "Hey, I want to get you. I want to tape a conversation for the podcast I do." And then I see you tweeting that you got the Rona. And then I asked you yesterday, I think, or the day before, are you, just checking in on you. And then once I found out you were okay, then I circled back and again asked you if I could press record on a phone conversation. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling just fine. The thing about Omicron is that...
Oh, you got yourself the Omicron?
Yeah, because, I'm triple vax and I don't think I think I'm protected against the Delta variant, but this new variant, to say that there are breakthroughs is kind of misleading because basically everybody who's been fully vaccinated is still very, very susceptible to this. And I think large numbers of people will get this. But the good news is, it was truly like a sniffle, and no other problems other than just a little sniffle. Emily got it, and she got a little bit of a sore throat. But most people will get this sooner or later because it's highly contagious. And to say it's like the flu is, even that is an exaggeration because it's not nearly as troubling as the flu. Now, for the horribly, tragically misinformed people who have not gotten vaccinated, a lot of them will be hospitalized and a certain number of them will die when they get Omicron, which millions of people are going to if the indications from abroad are correct. So, this will be something that we'll be living with forever, the way, the flu was deadly in 1918, and then it turned into, an endemic rather than pandemic problem. And that's what's going to happen with this thing, too. We're all going to get shots every year the way we do for the flu. And if you take them, you're going to be fine. And if you get it, you'll get what I got, which was a extraordinarily mild sniffle.
What about what you told me off air, that your testicles grew to a tremendous size,
right,
like the grapefruit?
I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Because of the vaccine. Or no, wait, was that Nicki Minaj? Was that someone? Yeah. She said that somebody got vaccinated and then as a result, which is like the worst kind of thing, to warn people that is going to happen. And it's so effective. It's so many of these tactics and techniques and narratives and threats have been so effective. I want to ask you about a bunch of things. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's start with just an old goat that you interviewed or that you wrote about. Again, you pretty much know everybody. I think, what's the legend? You met Dr. King in your living room when you were like 8 or something.
I did. Yeah, I was 8 years old.
You've interviewed presidents. People may not know, because you're an old goat and you're not someone who is inflammatory and screaming your entire career, people might not know that you're one of the most thoughtful and respected journalists in the game and have been for a long time. You've interviewed all of the presidents.
First of all, you're very kind. I like that word, thoughtful. I think we need more of that. I don't know whether I am, but it's something that I appreciate in other people.
Really? You don't? Come on, that's some false modesty. You don't think you're thoughtful?
That is, okay, that's false
come
modesty.
Come on, stop that nonsense.
You're right.
You're thoughtful.
That's something that I aspire to be, and maybe on some occasions can achieve it. In terms of presidents, I've actually interviewed 9 of the last 10 American presidents, either before, during, or after their presidencies. The only one I missed was Reagan. But I go back to Nixon, who I met in 1988.
I didn't know you. I guess I didn't know you interviewed Nixon. Carter and Obama, you've written books about, and obviously
Gerald Ford, I interviewed at Vail one year, and I interviewed, I've interviewed both the Bushes, and I interviewed Clinton more than any other print journalist when he was president. And Obama, I knew since he was an Illinois state senator. I'm from Chicago originally, so I went back with Obama more than 20 years. And Trump, I actually interviewed in the late 90s for an NBC News piece. I went to his ridiculous office, but would not have interviewed him when he went into politics, even if I had been offered the opportunity, because I don't interview people who lie every time they open their mouth. What's the point? what's the point? It's a stupid interview.
I mean, you're Jonathan Alter. I haven't interviewed any presidents, but I was on The Apprentice season finale. Longtime listeners have probably heard this story. And when they came to us while we were taping and said, Mr. Trump is on his way here, would you like to meet him? I waited for the other comedians I was working with to answer, and nobody said anything. And I just said, does he want to meet us? And they said, not necessarily, but if you want to meet him. I was like, I mean, I'm good. Like, I was there to be on The Apprentice. Like, at that point, I was like, I think in my mind, I think that guy's like a rapist or a serial sexual assault. Like, I don't really want to be even, like, I said that then. I was like, I just want to be on The Apprentice. I don't need to meet him. If I could make fun of him, that'd be awesome if they could make the cut.
That's really funny. Well, yeah, you knew. I mean, those of us who live in New York have known that he was a wretched human being for many, many years. And I actually interviewed him. I was doing a story on how everything is oversized now. This was, I think, like 1998 or something like that. You know, and you go in like a small at Starbucks as a grande or whatever, you know, and you order popcorn at a movie and you get like a, 4-gallon tub of popcorn.
I live for it. I eat that whole thing myself. I get refills. I do.
So I just, because he was sort of champion of making everything big.
Yep.
I went over and interviewed him, and I took note of his narcissism then. But one of the things that was strange about it was that a few years earlier, when Mikhail Gorbachev came to New York, in advance of that, Trump said that he was planning to meet with Gorbachev, and that Gorbachev was going to come to Trump Tower and they were going to have a meeting, which was a total lie. So somebody was making a documentary about Trump, and it was actually paid for initially by the Hartz Mountain guy, the pet food mogul who owned Hartz Mountain. And I was interviewed, and I said two things about him. I said that he claimed to be the richest real estate developer in New York. That was completely untrue. And that he claimed to have a meeting scheduled with Gorbachev when he came to New York. And when I called the Soviet embassy and the U.S. State Department, they said that was never on the schedule. So that was just a big fat lie. So he saw the movie before it was released and sent me a letter threatening to sue me for what I said in it. And then he got the documentary suppressed. It didn't even come out until 2016. It's available online. It's called Trump, What's the Deal? And it's a kind of a dissection of his failed business career. But in any event, I took the letter where he was threatening to sue me to the Newsweek lawyer, and they just laughed and said, join the club. Everybody in New York has been threatened by this joker. And then a few years later, when I wanted to interview him, it was as if nothing had happened. So,
right. Because he needed you.
Yeah, he wanted to get on NBC. Yeah. So nothing's changed. The guy is, I think Colbert is right about him when he says he's fundamentally boring because there's nothing surprising about him. That's the difference. Like Jimmy Carter, at first glance, you go, oh, well, he's the boring one, But when I was working on my book, every day I would learn something new and unexpected about Jimmy Carter. And with Trump, it's just the same story over and over and over again.
I hate to disagree with you and Colbert, but I think he might be fundamentally boring to thoughtful people who are highly educated, intelligent, but to people who are maybe not. And I don't want to be insulting, even though I'm going to be insulting and maybe talk about myself. Like, if you're really into WWF wrestling, WWE wrestling, you might even know it's fake, but what's coming. Like, it's entertaining, and I think he's a super entertaining fella.
Oh, he's very entertaining. I'm not taking that away from him. I'm just saying that, the people said when he ran for president, how can he run? He has no experience. And I was saying then, well, no, he's actually the most experienced candidate who's run for president ever, because he has the most experience in the most important place to get elected president, which is television. He'd been on television so much. His understanding of the media was at almost genius levels. Right. So that was his edge, was his understanding of us and our weaknesses, and he exploited them and continues to very, very skillfully. What I was talking about and what I think that Colbert kind of meant is, as somebody who, you just can't learn anything new about him because it's the same story over and over and over again. We know exactly who he is. The only thing that changes is that when you think he's touched bottom, he crashes through the floor.
Right.
So he's always going to a different level of bottom.
Right.
Now one that is basically fascistic. But in terms of who he is as a person, I don't think there's anything new to learn about him at all, and that makes him kind of boring for historians, I think.
Yeah, he's like kind of a textbook fascist. It would seem, based on so many of the historians that I've talked to or kind of specialize in this. And if there's, maybe that's a lame phrase, textbook anything, but he does seem, I think that's the best word to describe him and his movement.
Yeah, I mean, if you read books like On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder or How Democracies Die or these other books, he checks a lot of boxes on how fascists operate. And, while that was a pretty explosive and maybe not fully merited thing to say about him when he first ran for president, now it is. I mean, he's basically, if you study the history of fascism, he fits it like a T.
Yeah, that's a great point, that when you didn't know it, maybe, I mean, a lot of people did predict it because he had so many of the hallmarks, and he knew a little bit about it, and he certainly did fall into it. So let me ask you, though, you have interviewed, as I said, so many, amazing people. And one of the, great things about just sitting and having a drink with you, or in this case on the phone, is you're like, I could ask you, tell me a story about a time you spent with so-and-so, and you could entertain me, and it would be super interesting. And I think kind of that's Old Goats allows for that, like you doing that. I'm really glad that you're doing this project. I think it's a great idea. And so I wanted to ask you specifically, though, about somebody that you talked to, who I had a great amount of admiration for. I met and interviewed him, I think, once, but I was really close and know his daughter well, Marion Groden. I want to ask you about your relationship and your conversation. Did you have a conversation with him? I just see that you wrote about him, and I thought it was interesting because I didn't realize how dedicated he was to a specific criminal justice issue. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, no, I wrote about him on Old Goats when he died earlier this year. But I wrote a remembrance of him. Chuck and I became good friends in the 90s.
Apparently.
And
Chuck.
And well, I mean, that's certainly what he called himself. And I mean, we had dinner many times with our wives, and I went out and visited him in Connecticut, and he came to New Jersey, and I just thought he was an extraordinary person, extremely eccentric, but also inspiring at the same time.
Yeah.
And talk about an interesting person.
Yeah, talk about somebody who's not boring.
Yeah. So, we met when he had a talk show on CNBC, which was parodied on SNL at the time. And I was his, I think he said after the show went off the air that I was his most frequent guest on that show in the 90s. I went on dozens of times, often talking about OJ, but about a lot of other things too, in that period in the 1990s. So, but yes, Chuck was a lot of fun to know, even though, he could be exasperating sometimes too. And so if anybody is interested in what he was like, you can go to my Old Goats Substack newsletter, and I wrote a piece about him. But just to give you a little bit of a sense, I think people know, that he was in The Heartbreak Kid, which if any of your listeners haven't seen, they need to go out and see the original, not the remake. And it's one of the all-time great comedies. Sybil Shepherd is in it, and Elaine May's daughter is in it. And it basically, the plot is that the character played by Chuck Grodin is on his honeymoon, and it's already pretty clear that he and his new wife are not really right for each other. And he goes to the beach and he meets Sybil Shepherd on the beach on his honeymoon.
During his honeymoon in Miami, Lenny meets beautiful and sophisticated Kelly. Every chance he gets, Lenny sneaks away from Lila to be with Kelly. And the more he gets to know her, the more he falls in love. Problems arise when the two women learn about each other is a hilarious last sentence in the plot. Problems arise when the two women learn. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Anyway, but one of there were many things that people didn't know about him. A lot of people remembered him from, Midnight Run, which was his movie with Robert De Niro, which is kind of a cult classic.
I knew him from his Tonight Show appearances first, which were epic.
Yes. So, he, within that community, his Tonight Show persona, he went on many times where he was cranky and in character the whole time, although in some ways it reflected the real Chuck. So people knew him from that. And he was in Rosemary's Baby with Mia Farrow. And then the Beethoven movies about, where he was the dad. And I asked him, why did you leave show business? Because I didn't know him until his film career was over. And he said, because I couldn't stand to yell one more time, Honey, the dog. So he just had enough of being in, stupid comedies. And he was really interested in becoming a journalist, and he did. And then he became a kind of a crusader, and he took up the cause of some women prisoners in New York State who had been wrongly imprisoned, and he got some of them out. And he became good friends with Governor Cuomo. He also had he loved old talk show hosts. They were his friends. And so one time, but he was so eccentric particularly about when he would eat and when the evening was over. So one time, Emily and I drove to Connecticut, where the other guests were like Mario and Matilda Cuomo and Phil Donahue and Marlo Thomas and a couple of other older talk show hosts. And we couldn't have been there more than a half an hour when Chuck said, the party's over, goodbye. And he shoot everybody out. Because in his mind, it was only supposed to last from, when it was 6 to 7 or something. That's what it was. And we had sort of wrongly assumed, this was before we knew him better, that it was for dinner. And, we were we were immediately corrected on that assumption. And I was joking with another adoring friend of his after he died that if you met him for dinner at 5:30, which was common at a restaurant, and you would be out of there and on your way home at 6:30, like just to give you,
that's bizarre. That's bizarre. I would be so unsettled by it, and especially if it's like a well-known, well-respected, famous person. I'm like, well, that guy doesn't like me.
Yeah, but he had other ways of showing that he did like you. So it was just, I don't know if you have any like deeply eccentric friends, but there's a certain humor and pleasure that comes from knowing them. So he was one of them.
What was was there an advocacy thing that he did for criminal justice? Is that what you wrote about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote partly about that just because nobody knows that about Chuck Grodin. I mean, he had a huge heart, and he was a huge social justice advocate. And sometimes when he would adopt a particular cause, and the one that I think led to the most productive work was wrongly accused women in prison. And he got several released. He took up their cases and got them out. And he was also interested in wrongly accused male prisoners. I think he got some of them out too, but that was just one of the areas of social justice that he was interested in. He did a commentary for years on CBS Radio where he took up a lot of those issues. He had a commentary on 60 Minutes too for a while as well. Then in his later years, he had some ill health and he wasn't as active. But in any event, he was a brilliant and entirely sincere comedian, if you can reconcile the two of those.
Well, for sure. I certainly can. Have been able to throughout my career, and who's not as well, or at least doesn't fill both of those. I am going to pitch a podcast partner for Old Goats because I do realize that having access to you is good for me because of your long-lived career experience and network, and I could listen to you talk about any of these experiences that you've had for the rest of my life. So let's. I hope you'll keep letting me do it. But I want to ask you about the generational point that I think you make in kind of the introduction to your Substack newsletter. Old Goats is it's generous about young folks and respecting them and their experiences and their future, as well as, a nuanced take on why it's important for folks who've lived lives like yours and the people you're talking to be part of the equation in all things. And so I've been criticized. I'll land the plane in a second here. I've been criticized for being ageist when I criticize people like President Biden or Nancy, Dianne Feinstein or Pat Leahy or people that just aren't as nimble in places they need to be, much less maybe even with their thoughts. And, people get really offended by that. They're usually older folks. And my point is, you, Jonathan Alter, have a daughter, Charlotte, who is a very successful journalist, now author. And it's kind of an example, I feel like, the point you're making. And let me be more specific. I want your daughter, Charlotte, running the shop, but I want you as her top advisor, chief of staff.
So I don't.
I mean, and for one specific human reason, she has so much more at stake at whatever her age, 30s, than you do in your 60s, and you have so much wisdom of experience. But I feel like the incentive of they got my whole future ahead of me is important to recognize. That's where I land.
Absolutely. And she wrote a book that came out last year called The Ones We've Been Waiting For, about the new generation of millennial politicians. Pete Buttigieg and AOC are just two of many that she profiled. And she has very strong feelings aligned with yours, which have been accentuated by the fact that 3 weeks ago she had her first grandchild, Rose Jane Chisano, Rosie, we call her. So when you're thinking about future generations and issues like climate change, you do have to defer to the young. And there is a case to be made for term limits, certainly on the Supreme Court. This idea of life tenure is ridiculous. It's not in the Constitution, and it was first sort of agreed to at a time when the average lifespan was, 50,
Right.
So all of these issues can be debated, and I think it's perfectly fine to say that Dianne Feinstein is too old to be in the Senate. She's shown some signs of it. When old people don't recognize when it's time to go, they open themselves up to very, very fair and legitimate criticism. I mean, I'm very critical of Justice Stephen Breyer for not stepping down. These folks think they're immortal. Well, they're not, and the stakes are extremely high, and it's time for him to go while there's a Democratic president, And so I think the people criticizing you for ageism are, I don't know what you said. Maybe if you just maligned everybody who's over 65, maybe they would have cause for complaint.
I'll specifically tell you what I said, and you tell me what you think at your age. I said once you turn 65, you should have to be forced into a studio apartment nursing home, and you had a good run, but make space. Do you think that's controversial?
That's a little. a little.
You think it's too small? You think it's too small of a space?
Yeah, it's too small of a space. So you're basically saying like concentration condos for seniors.
No, they could be deluxe. They can have all kinds of benefits. It's fun living.
Concentration camp. But basically, you're saying that we all need to be put out to pasture. So yes, I do reject that because 65 now is not what 65 used to be. So, I'm 64. When I turned 63, I took note of the fact that Franklin Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage at 63.
Right.
And if you look at pictures of him, he looks like he's 90, right? Whereas other people, I won't, mention myself because even though when I was a kid, I always looked much younger than I was now, I probably look older because I don't have any hair. But there are a lot of other 65-year-olds who have all of their faculties and wisdom and, run marathons. And so why do you want to be arbitrary and send them packing just because they turn 65? So you want to have some flexibility that takes account of the fact that people age at different rates. You want to have some sense that public policy needs to reflect generational change, and then you need to reconcile those two, which isn't as hard as it sounds. So, the New York Times, for instance, they have a mandatory retirement for their top editor. I believe it's 65.
Oh, wow.
But they don't have it for reporters because, there's some reporters who they're going great into their 70s. Why should they be forced out just because they're older? It just depends on how they're doing.
That's interesting. I've not really heard too many jobs that actually do, in fact, force people to retire. I'm sure there are plenty. But I would make the argument that if you're 90 years old and you're an excellent surgeon or pilot, seeing as that planes really fly themselves, and I'm not saying that really. I'm really thinking about people, especially working in public service. As leaders of certain agencies and governments, that I think that's where it comes into play, where you can start asking questions about where a younger person might be more effective in terms of their network, understanding technology, which I think previous generations didn't have as much to grapple with. But just to be clear, in my America, Jonathan Alter would be living in one room in Astoria. Forced into.
I have to tell you, I like Astoria. I got to know that when we were shooting Alpha House, which I've talked to you about.
Yeah.
Before
so good.
The Amazon comedy that I co-produced, and we had John Goodman and Amy Sedaris, a lot of other interesting actors.
Amazing show. Check it out.
And we shot at Kaufman Astoria Studios, and I went there, every day over the course of 21 episodes. And I loved Astoria. And it's really coming on as a neighborhood now. So your punishment for me is really not as serious as you might think. And if, our kids decided to buck the trend and blow off Brooklyn in favor of Queens, I could see an apartment in Astoria.
Well, I hate to tell you this. Well, first of all, everybody loves Astoria because people like you and I do, because of, I would imagine, the diversity, ethnic diversity.
Yeah,
there's an old joke. There's an old joke that in Astoria, Queens, people walk around going, "There's an American over there." But because you're saying that now, and my producer is telling me in my earpiece, we decided to move you to Utica.
Utica. Well, I have good feelings about Utica because I got an honorary degree from Utica College.
Oh wow! Okay.
So I went up there, and it's a very pleasant place. So, this idea of being sent away, it makes me a little bit uneasy, Pete, because I'm very obsessed with what I think should be called the democracy crisis. The fact that that democracy is hanging by a thread right now in this country, and as Hillary Clinton rightly says, it could end if the election goes the wrong way in 2024.
Yeah, and I just to give you credibility on that, in 2017, shortly after President Trump was elected, you were one of the invited guests that I was at a conference sponsored by our friend David Orr at Oberlin College about this crisis of democracy. And you've been obviously on this from then. And so I appreciate you pivoting to a serious point off of my trying to send you to out to pasture. Go ahead.
Just to finish the point, I mean, you know, the book to read is The Plot Against America. You know, if you want to read a novel about it, like by Philip Roth, right? And what happens? Charles Lindbergh becomes president, and they send the Jews to the countryside. So I'm just a little sensitive about going to Utica. Or even
just to be, I understand, but to be clear, in my own defense, it wasn't that you were Jewish. It was your age. It was an age threshold. I would apply this equally across all religions.
So instead of a Jewish star, we would have to have like a little emblem of a shuffleboard court that we'd have to
you'd have those like a walker with tennis balls on it.
Okay.
He doesn't like these jokes, folks.
How old are you?
He does not like it's. I've gone too far, folks. It's over. The bit is over. It's that's when a bit you can only make two ageist jokes. On the third one, you get the How old are you, motherfucker?
Wait, and how old are you?
I'm 46.
Okay, so 4 years from now, which is in the heartbeat, you're going to be opening your snail mail one day, and you're going to get something. You know what it is?
It's a check from the government.
No, that doesn't start until 65. You're going to get an AARP.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
And then you're going to be singing a different tune.
I would imagine it's probably a tune from an early talkies. In your case,
Goodman. You're going to be singing your Benny Goodman tune.
In your case, I'm guessing it is. I can't think of a. I can't do it anymore to you.
Flack,
I've played into this like too much. Like listeners are getting annoyed by it. I think you're here because I have such a great deal of respect for your wisdom and experience and your career. Always have, and like to remind you about the first time I was going to interview and everybody else, Jonathan Alter. I prepared more for that interview than any other. The second one I prepared the most for was Oliver Stone. But I read the books. I read the articles. I did a deep dive into who you were. I wanted to get that interview right because I knew I wanted another shot before the first one. I knew I wanted to impress you and make you feel like you wanted to come back. And that's always been, and then you became a mentor to me. And obviously I've worked with your wife at Colbert and know your family. So our relationship deepened. But I feel immense love and respect for you and your actually I think all your wife and all three of your kids even more. I'm not even kidding.
I do too, and it's mutual, Pete, and that's why even when you insult my demographic, I'll always come on your show.
Well, let me ask you one more question though about a serious question, of course, about as you were headed into the democracy crisis. And do you want to do a little game theory or, playing out certain outcomes, or is that is there a better question?
It's important. I think it's important that we do that, even though we don't know what's going to happen. So, we need to be prepared by considering every possibility. So, yes, I'm not only willing to do that, I'm eager to do that. And I think people need to do that more so they wake up to the threat.
Okay, so then you can answer whatever question you want, but my specific question would be, what do we kind of need to be thinking about and doing right now to prepare for the midterm elections, which will be, 12, 13 months from now or something?
Well, I don't think we're at risk of losing our democracy in the midterm elections. So the big story is 2024. We have one of our political parties that doesn't admit defeat. It's heads we win, tails you lose. Like if we win the election, like in Virginia, it's great, everything's great. If you lose, then they're out, pulling a Trump. And the scary thing about what's happened in the last 9 months is that Trumpism has metastasized. The big lie has metastasized. And you now have Trumpists in the states who are placing people in key positions, counting ballots, who believe the only legitimate elections are the ones that Republicans win, and that's a recipe for tyranny. So it's not going to be, a bunch of thugs, aging thugs, by the way, assaulting the Capitol the next time. Although some of these stories about concerns about right-wing sentiment in the armed forces make me think that threat of violence is still in our future. But the more immediate problem is what happens in subverting elections. So there are two big challenges. One is voter suppression, which you hear a lot about. That's been around forever. I'm not minimizing it. It's terrible, but not being able to vote on Sunday when the whole time I was growing up, you couldn't vote on Sunday, or not being able to, vote by mail is terribly wrong. And I hope that the Freedom to Vote Act passes, and I think there's still a possibility for it early next year.
Yeah, could you just elaborate on that's one point I'd want you to elaborate on. What do you think the possibility of the Voting Rights Acts? There are two of them, I guess, that have passed the House. They're in the Senate. Why do you think that that's possible?
Well, before we get into filibuster land, I just wanted to clarify the distinction between doing something about voter suppression, which we should, but that's an old problem and we can survive it. I mean, 50 years ago, you would have heavily black counties in the South that would have literally no registered black voters, right? So we have been there as a country before. Where we have never been before, and again, I'm not minimizing voter suppression. I've been writing about it for years. But where we have never been before is voter subversion, overturning the will of the voters, not having a peaceful transfer of power to whoever wins the election. That we've never had before. Even in the election of 1860, I was saying, well, we had it, when Lincoln was elected, they seceded. Well, they seceded, but they didn't reject the election returns. They acknowledged that Lincoln was president. We now have a major political party that will not acknowledge the election returns. And this is a huge, huge problem.
Right.
So just to go back to the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Act, which, by the way, there's not that much they can do about voter subversion, but they can do a lot about voter suppression, and they're both very good bills. The good news is that the Freedom to Vote Act is actually Joe Manchin's bill. So don't confuse it, with Build Back Better, which is very much not his bill, as we know. The new Voting Rights Act is his bill, and it's written in such a way as to pass constitutional muster. It's just a very, very good bill. The problem is you can't pass it through reconciliation, and they only have they might have there might be a couple of Republicans who go for it. They might have 52, 53 votes, but not anywhere close to 60. So then, there's a question of what do you do? And there are really only two options. Well, there's three options, but eliminating the filibuster altogether is a complete non-starter. That's simply not going to happen. So the two real options are what's called a carve-out, where you pass a rule change that says that bills about voting will be treated in the same way as Supreme Court nominations or lower federal court nominations or executive branch appointments. Those are the three carve-outs that we have now, where you don't need 60 votes to confirm the ambassador.
But what about what they? I like that. But what about what they just did? Didn't they carve out to pass the debt ceiling?
Yes, they carved out the debt ceiling, right? So that's another argument in favor of a carve out. Like if they could do it for the debt ceiling, why can't they do it for voting?
Right.
But it's still a pretty heavy lift, my understanding, So I think that the other option, which doesn't get as much attention as it should, and which I wrote a piece about in the Daily Beast, and I ran a version of it on Old Goats, is the Jimmy Stewart filibuster, to restore the old talking filibuster where you have to, like Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you have to stay on the floor all night, and to do it with the requirement that what you do, it has to be germane, so you can't have a situation where Ted Cruz is reading, Dr. Seuss all night. And you also have, as part of the rule change, that instead of the magic number for proceeding to a vote being 60, the new magic number would be 41 to block a vote. So you just flip the emphasis, and that doesn't get rid of the filibuster. It satisfies all those senators who want to keep the filibuster, but it makes it harder. So, despondent Democrats will go, well, the Republicans will still do that. But this goes to your age point. They have a bunch of Republicans who are over 80, and they might be able to stay on the floor, and they would each have to be on the floor all night, like, emergency room doctors or OBGYN doctors. They might have to, go in 2 or 3 nights a week at 3 o'clock in the morning. How long can they keep that up? Not very long. And as Al Franken told me in the Old Goats interview, he thought that a talking filibuster of voting rights would only last for 24 hours. I think he's being too optimistic. I think it would go on for a couple of weeks at least, but eventually they would proceed to a vote. Eventually they wouldn't be able to have 41 Republicans on the floor blocking a vote on
You want
to
see the Democrats almost, just to be, I don't mean to be over dramatic, but not stop talking on the Senate for weeks. That's a movie.
No. The Republicans would be the ones who would have to not stop talking. The Democrats would only need 11 Democrats for
even worse. Well, that's an even better strategy.
The Republicans would have to have 41, 41 members on the floor at all times.
Now, here's
to prevent them from moving to a vote that could be decided by a simple majority. So it would say, yes, you can filibuster. Yeah, if you've got now I used to say the bladder, but the rules allow you to leave the floor to go to the bathroom. But you got to bring in the cots. You got to stay there night after night, the way they did in 1964 when they tried and failed to filibuster the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So you go back to that.
Okay,
and
so
it's been so long that people forget that that's the way filibusters traditionally worked, and that's the way they should work in the future.
So quickly, though, and I'll let you go here, talking to you, and, it's like I talk to a lot of really smart political scientists, I suppose that could also be strategists who might make a suggestion, or you wrote this piece about it, as what you were just talking about, the strategy. But they aren't Jonathan Alter. So my question is, you have access to, I'm sure, in relationships, I'm guessing, with staffers and senators themselves. Like, what do they, so I can ask you right now, what do they think about your strategy? Why don't you call up your pal? I'm trying to think of who your pal, your most obvious pal would be the senator from Ohio, Senator
Sherrod Brown.
Sherrod Brown. You got to be.
Ones.
No,
there's other ones.
Okay, you got your Chris Coons. I bet you're buddies with Chris Coons.
I do know him. I know a lot of these guys. And
call up Sheldon Whitehouse.
But I've done some reporting on this, and the answer, I'm sorry to tell you, it comes back to, can they convince Manchin to do that? Now, as I mentioned, it's Manchin's bill. So it's not like Build Back Better. Like, he has a strong
We're talking about
incentive.
voting bills. Right. Just to remind people. Right.
Well, the Freedom to Vote Act is his bill. He wrote it, not just co-sponsored. He wrote it with staff. And so he has a strong incentive. And he has said things to suggest that he might be open to this. Sinema, on the other hand, has been less open to a talking filibuster. So they'd need her also. So anybody who's from Arizona or West Virginia, tell your senators you want a talking filibuster. So, but the problem is it's been covered as a kind of a binary thing. You know, you're for eliminating the filibuster or keeping the filibuster. And there's a real opportunity here to reform the filibuster. And the idea of the talking filibuster proposal, the 41 on the floor, to make it more specific, is that of the great political scientist Norm Ornstein, who's very plugged in.
Oh, good.
And he feels that there's a real chance for this. I mean, that was before Build Back Better, that foundered, before Manchin did what he did on Fox News Sunday. So, they're going to have to deal with that first. But if they can get that resolved, then they will turn their attention to reforming the filibuster. And Manchin has said that he's open to it. So we'll see. But people shouldn't be despondent about it, because there's a decent chance it'll happen and we can get a voting rights bill. That does not solve the problem of this new theory on the right that state legislatures can appoint a competing slate of electors who were, even though their candidate, presumably Trump, didn't win the vote in that state. They think they can subvert the will of the people. There's quite a number of them now who are doing whatever they can to advance this seriously authoritarian, tyrannical.
Yeah, and they'll have, by the way, I think they'll have their people will be convinced they didn't subvert the will. The Chinese infiltrated. They'll tell a story. They'll make up a story and say, we didn't do that. No, these are the votes. That was a fraudulent, they'll just come up with something. Right. And we've learned that they buy it. It's wild, but
yes, they will lie. I mean, we now just had a Associated Press story. They went to these battleground states, and they really pursued, okay, how much voter fraud was it? And there were 475 cases total out of tens of millions of votes cast, where like one guy sent in his dead mother's absentee ballot, and another guy was a felon and he didn't realize that he couldn't vote. And so even though in his state felons couldn't vote, he went and voted. That's what those 475 consisted of. That was it. The rest of the votes, of the tens of millions of votes, had been checked over and over again, and there were no irregularities. So there's a reason they call this the big lie. The big lie was originally used by Joseph Goebbels in Nazi Germany. And the idea was, if you tell a big enough lie, it's easier to get people to believe it than a small lie. And that's what's happened. And that's why it's quite rightly called the big lie.
Right.
Because a tremendous number of Republicans believe it. And that is scary as shit.
Yes.
So that's why I'm more scared this year than I was when Trump was president. Because when Trump was president, I was looking forward to, getting him out of there. And then when they finally got him out of there and we had January 6th, I thought, okay, that takes care of that. Now we can move on to the next chapter of American history. We don't have to worry about this anymore.
And then I guess the next thing would be the impeachment. And you thought, well, at least if they impeach him, if these Republican senators, a couple, vote to impeach, he won't be able to run constitutionally again. So, and then we were disappointed there as well.
Right. And then what happened is you had these polls showing that large numbers, a strong majority of Republicans believed the election was stolen. They believed the big lie, and that a scary minority of Republicans, scary level, 20-something% believed that you could use violence to make political change.
And they also crazily believe certain things about vaccines and COVID that is killing them. They believe that as well, a frighteningly large amount, down political lines.
Well, that's a death cult that they've created. And if you look at the difference in the COVID death rates between Trump counties and Democratic counties, it's very, very striking. And so to bring full circle to our conversation about older people, 1 in 100 Americans over the age of 65 have died from COVID. That's a pretty large number. But what is, increasingly clear is that number is dramatically higher among Republicans. So that's why some Democrats are saying, well, they've created a death cult.
Yeah. I don't know how you disagree with it. Okay, so I've been talking to you for an hour. I can't thank you enough. And folks listening, I normally would say this after the interview. It is the holiday time. A great gift would be any of Jonathan Alter's books, or you could even subscribe to his Substack newsletter. But I mean, you've written amazing biographies of Obama, FDR, Jimmy Carter, and they're all wonderful reads. And I think, what do you think? Do you think they make good gifts?
I do, actually. I think to be honest about it, I think of the books, the two best gifts would be The Defining Moment, FDR's 100 Days, and The Triumph of Hope, which gives hope to a lot of Democrats who read it. And just book came out 15 years ago, and it's just still really selling a lot. Or my most recent book, which I also think gives hope, which is his very best, Jimmy Carter Life. That's a full biography of a guy who turns out to be super interesting, even if you thought he was kind of, dull when he was talking about energy when he was president. He's led an epic American life. It's not true that he was a crappy president, great former president. He did many, many interesting, far-sighted things as president, even though he was a political failure. And his early life in the Jim Crow South and adult life in the Jim Crow South is super interesting. So, that book is just out in paperback, and a number of people I've come across have been buying that as a Christmas gift. In terms of the Substack newsletter, you can be a paid subscriber, but you can also read it for free if you sign up. You get it as an email.
And all of the links for all of Jonathan Alter's works are in the show notes for this episode. What a pleasant, well, it wasn't a surprise. I appreciate that you gave me an hour of your time. You're so great to talk to, and it's really means a lot to me. Thank you, sir.
Anytime, Pete. I love talking
also,
to you too.
I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, I feel bad. I privately reached out to you, congratulated you on becoming a grandfather for the first time. You mentioned it earlier, and I didn't say anything. I didn't want people to think I was insensitive. You were making a point, but just real quick, what would you like to say about how does it feel that what has this experience been? Briefly, if you don't, if you want.
I don't want to sound like a cliche, but it is really, really fun. And the unfortunate thing is, because I have COVID and my wife has COVID, we can't see the baby for a little while yet. But it's, it's.
You've met the child.
No other feeling. Yes. Yeah, we.
Okay, I know it was recent.
Yeah, we just got COVID a few days ago, and
is it true? Is it true that Is it true that you and your wife are such a big deal? You and your wife are such a big deal that you actually got COVID from another well-known person. Is that true that you got COVID from Cory Booker?
No.
It's okay. That's a room. That's the scuttlebutt,
we
sir.
We actually did get COVID from a somewhat well-known person, but I'm not going to rat him out.
Well, what does his name rhyme with? Is it Schmeven Schmomer? Is that what it is?
No.
All right.
No. You can rest assured that it is not.
Is it Tom Mewert? Is that who it is?
Tom who?
John Stewart. John, that was bad. That was my bad. That was my bad.
Sorry. So no, this person is not nearly as well known as that.
Okay. All right.
He's on TV some of the time, but he's not nearly as well known as that. But his name might be familiar to your listeners, but I'm not going to provide it because I think that's in seriously bad taste.
Mm-hmm. Is it Scott Baio? You tell us if it was Scott Baio, right?
If it was Ty Babylonia. If you want to go figure skating, I can't go very deep.
Wow.
No.
You are. I knew that's how big of a deal you were. That you actually got.
Scott.
It was who?
It was not Scott.
Oh, all right. Okay. Scott. See, of course they're friends. Scotty. Scotty. No, it wasn't Scotty. All right, buddy. It's great to talk to you and to hear your laugh. And what a joy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you go. There he goes, Jonathan Alter, and that is today's show. Maybe I'll do 2 guests a day for the rest of the week. Maybe I'll just do 1. I'm trying to take it easy. I say that I will do that every week, and then I end up not doing it at all. So we'll see who I get booked and who I don't and what gets done. The girls are off school, so I'd love to try to get out and do something with them, but there's no snow to ski on, and I'm not sure what else we can really do that will be too fun, what with the COVID stuff and all that's happening with it. So I look forward to talking to you this week. That's for damn sure, as we're all kind of locked up. Most people maybe not. I don't know what you're doing with your life. But I look forward to hearing from you either way. So reach out any way that you can. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, or join the Discord anytime. And every Thursday night, our Zoom Hangouts. Hope to see it there. Thanks for listening, folks. I love you guys. I hope you're okay, and I hope to hear from you soon. Let's talk. John Carroll's got a new single out, by the way. He's singing along with, go to joncarroll.org to get his new single, Rich Man's Daughter. Check that out. I'll try to play that on the show. I keep forgetting to grab it and play it. But joncarroll.org. Johnny, take us away.
Stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.